A millionaire single dad sees a waitress helping his disabled son, without judgment, without pity, just pure kindness. And in that one moment, something inside him changes. He spent years building walls, hiding from the world, but this woman, this stranger, connects with his son in a way he never could. As the bond between them deepens, secrets begin to unravel, ones that could either bring them closer or tear everything apart. Who is she really? And will love be strong enough to break through everything they've both been running from? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The windshield wipers squeaked back and forth, fighting against the steady rain that had been falling for hours. Alex Hart's fingers drummed against the steering wheel as he watched the red brake lights ahead blur into crimson streaks through the wet glass. The GPS screen flickered, recalculating their route for the third time in 20 minutes. Taking local roads through Millbrook, the robotic voice announced. Estimated arrival time, 2 hours and 15 minutes. Alex glanced in the rearview mirror. Max sat in his wheelchair, secured in the specially modified back of their SUV, his face turned toward the window. The boy's reflection showed the same tight jaw and furrowed brow he'd worn since they'd left the school principal's office 3 hours ago. "Hey, buddy," Alex tried, keeping his voice light. "Want to pick some music?" Max's only response was to cross his arms tighter across his chest, still staring out at the rain. The silence felt heavy, filled only by the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the patter of rain against metal and glass. Alex swallowed hard, fighting the familiar ache in his chest. This was the third school in 18 months. Each time he told himself it would be different. Each time it wasn't. Today's incident report sat in his briefcase like a brick. Hostile behavior, refusal to participate, or disruption of classroom activities. The traffic inched forward, and Alex followed the GPS directions onto a smaller road lined with strip malls and chain restaurants. His stomach growled, reminding him that neither of them had eaten since breakfast. The dashboard clock read 5:47 p.m. "Getting kind of hungry," Alex ventured. "How about we grab something to eat?" A slight shrug from the back seat was all he got, but it was better than nothing. Up ahead, a familiar restaurant logo glowed through the rain. One of those family-friendly places with games and a mascot, the kind that usually put Max at ease. Alex pulled into the parking lot, carefully positioning the vehicle near the entrance where the wheelchair ramp would have the shortest distance to cover in the rain. He grabbed Max's rain jacket from the seat and moved to help his son out of the car. The hostess greeted them with a practiced smile, her eyes flickering to Max's wheelchair before settling into that particular expression Alex had come to recognize. Overly cheerful, slightly uncomfortable. "Welcome to Happy Harbor. Table for two." They were led to a corner booth where Alex helped Max transfer from his chair. The waitress bounced over, her name tag covered in cartoon stickers. "Hi there, guys. Can I start you off with some super fun appetizers?" Max slumped lower in his seat, and Alex ordered waters for both of them, along with mozzarella sticks he knew would go untouched. Around them, families chattered and laughed, silverware clinked against plates, and arcade games beeped in the background. A group of kids ran past their table, then doubled back, one boy pointing openly at Max's wheelchair. "Look at that," the kid stage whispered to his friends, loud enough to carry. "Why's he got that?" Max's hands clenched into fists on the table. Alex saw the storm brewing in his son's eyes, the same look from the principal's office earlier. "Max," he started, but it was too late. "Take a picture, it'll last longer," Max shouted, causing heads to turn throughout the restaurant. Before Alex could react, Max grabbed the metal napkin dispenser and hurled it across the table. It crashed against the opposite booth with a loud clang, napkins exploding into the air like rectangular confetti. "I'm not some zoo animal," Max's voice cracked as he grabbed his wheelchair and roughly pulled himself into it. The other customers stared openly now, parents pulling their children closer, waitstaff hovering uncertainly at the edges of the scene. Alex watched helplessly as Max wheeled himself toward the exit, bumping into chairs in his haste to escape. The manager appeared, a thin man in a polo shirt with concerned eyebrows and a practiced smile. "Sir, I'm so sorry, but..." "I know." Alex cut him off, pulling out his wallet. He dropped enough cash on the table to cover their untouched drinks and the napkin dispenser. "We're leaving." The rain had lightened to a drizzle when Alex caught up to Max outside. His son sat by the car, chest heaving, tears mixing with raindrops on his cheeks. Without a word, Alex helped him back into the vehicle. They drove in silence through unfamiliar streets, past darkened shops and empty parking lots. Alex's mind raced with all the things he should say, all the ways he should handle this. But the words stuck in his throat. He wasn't good at this part. Never had been. Sophie would have known exactly what to do, what to say. But Sophie wasn't here anymore. The gas gauge light blinked on, pulling Alex from his thoughts. He peered through the gloom, looking for signs of life among the shuttered businesses. A warm, yellow glow caught his eye, a small diner tucked between a closed antique shop and a laundromat. The neon sign buzzed quietly, Dottie's Corner. Alex pulled into the cracked parking lot, killing the engine. The diner looked worn but clean, with condensation-frosted windows and a "open" sign that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but at this point any port in a storm would do. He glanced back at Max, who had uncrossed his arms and was studying the building with cautious interest. After a moment, his son's voice came quietly from the back seat. "Hope they have fries." The hint of normalcy in those words made Alex's throat tight. He got out and helped Max with his chair, and together they approached the diner's entrance. A small bell jingled overhead as Alex pushed the door open, the sound somehow both welcome and uncertain, like the first notes of a song neither of them knew yet. The bell's cheerful jingle faded as the door swung shut behind them. Alex blinked, letting his eyes adjust to the warm lighting inside Dottie's Corner. The diner was a stark contrast to the plastic brightness of Happy Harbor. Here, worn leather booths in deep burgundy lined the walls, their brass buttons catching the light from vintage-style pendant lamps hanging overhead. A long counter stretched along one side, its surface bearing the gentle scratches and character marks of decades of service. Behind the counter, a chalkboard menu covered the wall in sweeping handwriting, decorated with little doodles of stars and planets around the daily specials. The soft notes of Miles Davis drifted from hidden speakers, mixing with the gentle clink of silverware and murmured conversations from the few occupied tables. Alex tensed, preparing for the usual awkward pause that came whenever they entered a new place. But before he could scan for an accessible table, a waitress appeared beside them, notepad in hand and a genuine smile on her face. Her name tag read Joy in playful handwriting, decorated with a tiny shooting star. "Welcome to Dottie's," she said, her voice warm and natural. She didn't do that thing Alex had come to expect, the quick glance at Max's wheelchair followed by the too bright smile. Instead, she crouched down to Max's eye level, her movement smooth and casual. "All right, space traveler, I've got 2 premium seating options for you tonight," Joy said, her eyes twinkling. "Would you prefer front row seats for watching the meteor shower?" She gestured to a booth by the window. "Or maybe spaceship seating for planning your next intergalactic mission." She pointed to another booth near a wall decorated with vintage astronomy posters. Max's mouth fell slightly open. He stared at Joy like she was speaking a language he'd never heard before, but wanted to learn. Alex felt his own surprise mirror his son's. This wasn't the practiced cheerfulness they usually encountered, but something entirely different. Joy didn't rush them, didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter. She just waited, still at Max's level, that same easy smile on her face. "Spaceship," Max finally said, his voice quiet but clear. "Excellent choice, Commander," Joy replied with a playful salute. She led them to the booth, which Alex now noticed had been modified to accommodate a wheelchair at the end. No awkward shifting of chairs or apologetic furniture moving, just a space that was ready and waiting. As Alex helped Max get settled, Joy pulled out her notepad. "So, Commander, while you review the mission parameters, that's the menu in Earth language. Can I interest you in some intel about our secret weapon?" Max looked up at her, curiosity replacing the earlier tension in his features. "Secret weapon?" "Oh yeah," Joy leaned in conspiratorially. "We've got this shake, the Andromedian Special. Legend has it, it was created using a recipe transmitted from distant galaxies. Green vanilla ice cream, swirled with stardust sprinkles, topped with a cloud of whipped cream and a mysterious glowing cherry. She straightened up with a wink. But I probably shouldn't be telling you this. It's classified information. A sound escaped Max that made Alex's heart skip. A laugh. Small and rusty from disuse, but definitely a laugh. Green ice cream? Food coloring, Joy stage whispered. But don't tell the aliens. They're very proud of their recipe. She tapped her nose knowingly. Speaking of classified information, I'm going to need to verify your superhero clearance level. Who's your favorite? Spider-Man, Max answered without hesitation, his voice stronger now. Excellent choice. Web slinging through New York, helping the little guy. Joy nodded approvingly. You know, I always thought his real superpower wasn't the spider stuff. It was how he kept cracking jokes even when things got tough. Max's eyes lit up. That's what I always say. Dad, remember when… He caught himself, some of the old guardedness returning to his expression. But Joy smoothly continued. Let me guess, you're more of a Tony Stark fan? She asked Alex, her perception obvious in her gentle smile. Actually, Alex found himself saying, I'm partial to Bruce Banner. The scientist who has to learn to accept his whole self? Yeah, I can see that. Joy nodded, and something in her understanding made Alex feel suddenly seen in a way that was both unnerving and oddly comforting. She took their orders, the Andromedian special for Max, coffee and a burger for Alex, and moved away to give them space. But she kept checking back, each time with a new space fact or superhero reference that made Max's face light up. She never hovered, never pitied, never treated Max as anything other than what he was, a 9-year-old boy who happened to use a wheelchair. Alex watched in amazement as his son slowly unfurled from his protective shell. Max asked questions about the vintage space posters on the wall, and Joy answered each one with enthusiasm and knowledge that suggested she actually cared about the subject. When she brought their food, she included a paper placemat with connect the dots constellations, complete with a small pack of crayons. The Astronomy Society meets here every other Thursday, she mentioned casually as she refilled Alex's coffee. They set up telescopes in the parking lot. Pretty cool stuff. The meal passed in a blur of comfortable conversation and genuine laughter, sounds Alex hadn't heard from his son in what felt like forever. When Joy brought the check, Max was still working on his shake, the green ice cream making his tongue look like an alien's. Can we come back here tomorrow? Max whispered to Alex as they prepared to leave, his voice carrying that mix of hope and hesitation that always made Alex's chest ache. Alex just nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. He helped Max into his jacket while Joy called goodbye from behind the counter, where she was now chatting and laughing with an elderly couple over pie and coffee. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Alex paused by the window, watching Joy inside as she threw her head back in genuine laughter at something the old man had said. Her entire face lit up with it. No trace of the exhaustion that must come from hours on her feet dealing with customers. She made it look effortless, this ability to connect, to make people feel at home. Standing there in the cool night air, Alex felt something loosen in his chest, like a knot he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the chilly air, and for the first time in weeks it felt like letting go rather than holding on. The morning sun painted long shadows across the kitchen table where Max finished his math worksheet. His pencil moved steadily across the paper, solving the last equation while Alex cleaned up their breakfast dishes. Homeschool lessons had become their new normal, though Alex still felt like he was finding his footing as a teacher. Done, Max announced, pushing the paper toward Alex with a satisfied smile. Alex checked the work, nodding approvingly. Great job. Ready for PT? Max's smile dimmed slightly, but he nodded. Physical therapy was never fun, but their new therapist, Dr. Chen, had a way of making the exercises feel less like work and more like challenges to overcome. An hour later, as they left the medical building, Max was tired but holding his head high. He'd managed to complete all his exercises, even the new stretches that made his muscles protest. Lunch? Alex asked, helping Max into the car. Max's eyes lit up immediately. Can we go to Dottie's? Alex pretended to consider it, though he'd already planned to return to the diner. Well, we did say tomorrow yesterday, and it is technically tomorrow now. Dad! Max groaned at the dad joke, but his grin gave away his excitement. The drive to the diner felt different in daylight. The worn brick building looked friendlier somehow, its faded awning fluttering in the breeze. Max tried to maintain his usual cool demeanor, but Alex caught him drumming his fingers on his armrests, a sure sign of anticipation. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The lunch rush hadn't started yet, and the diner was peaceful with just a few regulars scattered among the booths. Joy stood behind the counter, wearing an apron that looked like it had been pieced together from at least 3 different ones. Various pins decorated the fabric, superheroes, planets, and what appeared to be cartoon breakfast foods with faces. "Commander Max," Joy called out, her face lighting up with recognition. "Back for another mission?" Max's attempt at playing it cool crumbled instantly. His whole face brightened as Joy approached, notepad in hand and a sparkle in her eye. "Spaceship seating again?" she asked, already leading them to the same booth from yesterday. "Yes, please," Max replied, wheeling himself into position with practiced ease. Joy pulled out her notepad with a flourish. "Now let me see if I remember." She cleared her throat and made a series of bizarre sounds that vaguely resembled speech, complete with hand gestures. Max's eyes widened before he burst into giggles. "What was that?" "Your order in Andromedian, of course. 1 green shake with stardust sprinkles, right?" Joy winked. "That's what all those sounds meant." "Obviously, though my accent is terrible, the 3rd gravitational pull really throws off the pronunciation." Max laughed again, then surprised both himself and Alex by attempting his own string of alien sounds. Joy gasped dramatically. "Your Andromedian is excellent, much better than mine, though ... She leaned in conspiratorially. "I think you just ordered a plate of moon rocks with cheese sauce." Without thinking, Alex found himself making his own attempt at the made-up language, producing a series of ridiculous noises that had Max staring at him in delighted shock. Joy clutched her chest in mock horror. "Sir, we do not use that kind of language in this establishment. I believe you just insulted my grandmother's solar system." The 3 of them dissolved into laughter, and Alex felt something warm settle in his chest. When was the last time he'd played like this? When was the last time he'd let himself be silly? Their lunch arrived quickly. Another green shake for Max, a club sandwich for Alex, and a side of asteroid fries to share. Joy kept up the space theme throughout their meal, stopping by to share classified information about various constellations visible from their spaceship window. When it was time to pay, Max insisted on wheeling himself to the register. Joy rang up their order with a solemn expression. "Now, I should tell you both about our payment policy," she said, her tone serious but her eyes twinkling. "First-timers pay, second-timers get a riddle. Third-timers are family." Alex pulled out his wallet. "What's the riddle, then?" Joy's smile turned mysterious. "Why do heroes always sit by the window?" Max furrowed his brow, clearly already working on the puzzle. Alex handed over the payment, equally intrigued by the question. "Sleep on it," Joy advised, handing back their change. "The best answers come when you're not looking for them." The afternoon sun warmed their faces as they left the diner. Max was quiet for a moment, then announced, "Because they need to see trouble coming." Alex looked down at his son, surprised by both the quick response and the insight behind it. "Is that the answer?" Max shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "I don't think it matters." That evening, after Max had gone to bed, Alex sat at his computer. The day's events kept replaying in his mind. The laughter, the easy conversation, the way Joy had made them both feel so normal. Without quite knowing why, he opened a browser and typed Dottie's Corner Diner into the search bar. The results were sparse, no website, no social media presence, not even a proper business listing. But there, near the bottom of the page, was a single 5-star review. The title caught his eye immediately. "Sometimes you find home by accident." The rain drummed steadily against the diner's windows, turning the world outside into a gray blur. Alex sat alone at the counter, his fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The familiar bell chimed as another customer hurried out, leaving him as the only patron in Dottie's corner. Joy emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Today's featured cartoon characters wearing raincoats and holding umbrellas. She did a double take when she spotted Alex, her eyes scanning the empty space around him. "Your co-pilot ditch you?" she asked, leaning against the counter with a gentle smile. Alex's lips twitched. "He's having guy time with Tyler, his occupational therapist. Sometimes..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes we both need a break from dad time." Joy nodded, understanding flickering across her face. She grabbed the coffee pot and topped off his mug without asking. "Well, you picked a good day to fly solo. Nothing better than diner coffee during a storm." Thunder rolled outside, making the windows rattle. Joy glanced up at the old fluorescent lights as they flickered briefly. "Grew up with storms like this," she said, pulling up a stool behind the counter. "My dad used to say the thunder was just the sky doing bowling practice." Alex found himself smiling. "Did you believe him?" "Oh, totally. Spent half my childhood convinced there was a cosmic bowling league up there." She chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "This town's full of stories like that. Everyone's got their own version of why the creek curves the way it does, or why the old maple tree in the park grows sideways." "You've lived here your whole life?" Alex asked, surprising himself with his curiosity. Joy nodded, absently arranging sugar packets in their holder. "Born and raised, knew every shortcut and hiding spot by age 8. Had my first kiss behind the library, broke my arm falling out of the Peterson's apple tree, learned to drive in the empty lot behind the hardware store." Her voice carried a mix of fondness and something heavier. "Dad still lives in our old house on Maple Street." The way she mentioned her father, quick, almost careful, caught Alex's attention, but he didn't press. Instead, he found himself asking, "Did you always want to be a waitress?" Joy's laugh echoed through the empty diner. "No one wants to be a waitress," she said, but there was no bitterness in her tone. "But I don't hate it. Not here." She gestured around the diner. "Places like this, they're more than just somewhere to eat, you know." Before Alex could respond, the lights flickered again, longer this time. Joy straightened up, moving with practiced efficiency to pull out 2 thick candles from under the counter. She lit them just as the power went out completely. "Perfect timing," she said, placing one candle between them. The flame cast a warm glow across her face, softening her features. She poured more coffee into his mug, then filled one for herself. On the house, storm special. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the rain trace patterns on the windows. The quiet felt different in the candlelight, deeper somehow, more intimate. Alex found himself studying Joy's profile as she gazed out at the storm. There was something graceful about her hands wrapped around her coffee mug, something musical in the way she moved. The moment stretched, neither of them speaking. It should have felt awkward, but it didn't. The rain continued its steady rhythm, the candles flickered, and Alex realized he felt more at peace than he had in months. Finally, the storm began to ease. The power hummed back to life, and Joy blew out the candles with a small smile. She glanced at the clock and started gathering her things. "Closing time," she announced, though Alex had already noticed the darkness outside. "Sarah's coming in for the night shift." Alex stood, leaving money on the counter. "Let me walk you home," he offered, surprising himself again. "It's still raining." "Oh, no need," Joy protested, pulling on her jacket. "I've walked home in worse." "I insist," Alex said, more firmly this time. "Max would never forgive me if I let his favorite person catch pneumonia." Joy hesitated, then smiled. "Well, we can't disappoint the commander, can we?" They stepped out into the damp evening air, Joy locking the door behind them. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the streets glistened under the streetlights. They walked in companionable silence for a few blocks before Joy began to hum softly. The melody caught Alex's attention immediately. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The notes were perfectly pitched, even in their quietness. "You play?" he asked, watching her carefully. Joy's humming stopped abruptly. She looked away, her steps faltering slightly. Used to, she said simply, her voice carrying a weight he recognized, the weight of dreams set aside. They walked the rest of the way in silence, stopping at the corner of Maple Street. Joy turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the streetlight above them. "See you tomorrow?" she asked, and though the words were casual, something in her tone made them feel significant. Alex nodded. "See you tomorrow." He watched her walk away, disappearing into one of the old houses halfway down the block. The porch light flickered on, then off again after she'd gone inside. Alex stood there for a moment longer, feeling like something had shifted, though he couldn't quite name what. That night, lying in bed, Alex found himself replaying the evening in his mind. The candlelight, the comfortable silence, the sound of Joy's voice humming Chopin in the rain. Sleep eluded him as he stared at his ceiling, thinking about her voice in the dark, wondering about the story behind that simple "used to." The afternoon sun filtered through patchy clouds as Alex waited outside the therapy center. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, watching the glass doors for any sign of movement. When they finally slid open, Tyler wheeled Max out, both wearing expressions that told Alex everything he needed to know about how the session had gone. Max's face was set in that familiar stubborn frown, his shoulders tight as Tyler helped him into the car. After securing the wheelchair in the trunk, Tyler gave Alex a quick thumbs up, their coded signal for physically fine, emotionally rough. "Thanks, Tyler," Alex said, trying to catch Max's eye in the rearview mirror. His son stared determinedly out the window, arms crossed. The silence stretched as they pulled away from the curb. Alex cleared his throat. "So, buddy, I was thinking—" "I don't want to talk about it," Max cut him off, his voice sharp with the kind of anger that only comes from holding back tears. Alex nodded, keeping his voice casual. "Actually, I was thinking about lunch. How do you feel about stopping at Dottie's?" The change in Max's demeanor was instant. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and though he tried to hide it, a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "I guess that would be okay," he said, attempting to sound indifferent but failing completely. They pulled into the diner's parking lot just as the lunch rush sign went up in the window, though Alex had noticed the rush at Dottie's never quite matched the chaos of city restaurants. The familiar bell chimed as they entered, and the smell of coffee and grilled cheese filled the air. Joy was bent over a booth near the window, wiping down the table with practiced efficiency. She was humming softly, the same haunting melody Alex had heard in the rain the night before. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun with a pencil stuck through it that looked ready to fall at any moment. Max's eyes widened with recognition. "That's the song," he exclaimed, making Joy jump slightly. "You were playing it last night. I saw you through the window of the nursing home when Dad and I drove past. That was you, right?" Joy straightened up, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. She glanced quickly at Alex before turning to Max. "You've got sharp eyes, Commander," she said, tucking her cleaning cloth into her apron pocket. "And good ears, too." "You play piano?" Alex asked, surprised by this new piece of information. Joy shrugged, but there was something defensive in the gesture. "Just at the senior center in the evenings. It's nothing fancy, just a side thing I do. Keeps my fingers busy and the residents seem to enjoy it." She paused, then added more softly, "It brings them peace. Sometimes that's all we can offer, you know?" Alex watched her, seeing something new in the way she held herself. There was a grace to her movements he hadn't noticed before, the kind that comes from years of disciplined practice. He thought about the classical piece she'd hummed in the rain, the way her fingers sometimes tapped out rhythms on the counter when she was thinking. "Do you know space songs?" Max asked eagerly, wheeling himself toward their usual booth. "Like the theme from Star Wars?" Joy laughed, following them with menus they no longer needed. "I know a few, though I'm better with the classics, Chopin, Mozart, the old guys." "Could you play something for me sometime?" Max asked, his earlier mood completely forgotten. "Here at the diner?" Joy pretended to consider this seriously, tapping her chin with her order pad. "Well, I might be persuaded. If you can beat me at space trivia next time." She winked at him. "But I warn you, I've been studying." Max's face lit up with the challenge. "Deal. Dad, we need to go to the library after this. I need more space books." They fell into their usual routine, Joy bringing Max's alien shake without being asked, Alex ordering coffee that never seemed to empty, Max telling them about a new constellation he'd learned about. But Alex found himself watching Joy differently now, noticing the way she moved between tables like she was following music only she could hear. He thought about all the evenings he'd spent working late in his old life, all the simple moments he'd missed because he'd been too focused on the next big thing. And here was Joy, building a life out of small kindnesses, serving coffee with a smile, playing piano for elderly strangers, making a frustrated little boy feel seen and understood. The lunch rush came and went. As they prepared to leave, Max was still chattering about the space trivia challenge, making plans and strategies. "I'm going to win," he announced confidently as Alex helped him into his jacket. "We'll see about that, Commander," Joy called from behind the counter. "I've got some tricks up my sleeve." In the car, Max was more animated than he'd been in weeks. "She's cooler than you," he declared, watching the diner disappear in the side mirror. Alex couldn't help but smile. "Yeah," he agreed softly. "I think she is." The drive home was filled with Max's excited chatter about space facts and piano music. When they arrived, Alex helped Max get settled with his tablet and favorite space documentary. Then, for the first time in months, he opened his laptop. The familiar glow of the screen felt different somehow. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he began to type, lines of code flowing with a rhythm that reminded him of Joy's humming. It wasn't work, not really, just an idea, a small program that might help Max track his constellations better. Something simple, but real. The Saturday morning sun painted long shadows across the diner's parking lot as a black SUV pulled in, its tinted windows reflecting the golden light. The car door opened with dramatic slowness, and out stepped two figures dressed entirely in black. The taller one wore a sleek hoodie and dark sunglasses, while the shorter one sported a matching ensemble from his wheelchair, complete with a tiny earpiece that was actually just his regular hearing aid. Alex couldn't help but smile as he watched Max adjust his sunglasses for the 10th time. His son had spent the entire morning planning their covert operation, insisting they needed to dress the part for what he dubbed Mission Day. The idea had come to Max during breakfast, and he'd been so excited that Alex couldn't say no, even if it meant wearing all black in the warming spring weather. They approached the diner's entrance with exaggerated stealth. Max held up his hand in a wait signal, just like they'd practiced at home. "Agent Dad, do you copy? Area needs to be secured before we proceed." Alex pressed his finger to his ear, playing along. "Copy that, Agent Max. Proceeding with caution." The bell above the door chimed as they entered, making Max whisper, "Our cover's blown." But his worry disappeared instantly when he saw Joy behind the counter. She took one look at them and, without missing a beat, dropped into a crouch behind the counter. When she popped back up, she'd donned a pair of plastic sunglasses from her apron pocket and had fashioned a makeshift earpiece from a straw wrapper. "Agent J reporting for duty," she stage whispered, glancing left and right. "The perimeter is secure. Operation Milkshake is a go." Max's face lit up with pure delight. He wheeled himself to their usual booth with newfound purpose, keeping his head low like a true spy. Alex followed, touched by how quickly Joy had embraced their game. "Agents," Joy said seriously, approaching their table with her order pad held like a classified document. "I trust you've come prepared for today's mission." "Affirmative," Max replied, his voice dropping an octave in an attempt to sound more official. "We're here about the situation." He glanced around dramatically before leaning forward. "The pancake situation." Joy's eyes widened behind her plastic frames. "Ah, yes. Very classified. Very dangerous." She scribbled something on her pad. "I assume you'll need the usual cover. 1 alien shake for Agent Max and coffee for Agent Dad. Make it black," Alex added, getting into character. "Like my soul." Max giggled, breaking character for a moment before catching himself. Agent Dad. Spies don't giggle." "My apologies, Agent Max, it won't happen again." Alex straightened his face into what he hoped was a suitably mysterious expression. As Joy moved away to get their drinks, Max pulled out a small spiral notebook he'd brought from home. "Okay, here's what we know about the mission," he began, flipping it open with authority. "There's a secret recipe hidden somewhere in this diner. Bad guys want it. We have to protect it." Joy returned with their drinks, setting them down with conspiratorial care. "The situation is worse than we thought, agents," she whispered. "Intelligence suggests the enemy is developing syrup bombs." Max's eyes grew wide behind his sunglasses. "Syrup bombs?" he gasped. "But that's not all." He looked around before continuing. "Our sources say they also have pancake grenades." "Pancake grenades?" Joy clutched her chest in mock horror. "This is worse than the Great Waffle Crisis of 2022. She pulled out her order pad again and started taking notes. "Please, Agent Max, tell me everything you know. The fate of breakfast might depend on it." For the next hour, Max spun an increasingly elaborate tale involving secret underground pancake bunkers, a mysterious syrup cartel, and a rogue chef who had gone to the dark side. Joy documented everything with dutiful attention, occasionally adding her own details that made Max bounce with excitement. "But what they don't know," Max declared, waving a French fry for emphasis, "is that we have a secret weapon." "The spatula of destiny?" Joy guessed, making Alex snort into his coffee. "No." Max leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We have Agent J's supersonic sonic sound system." Joy raised an eyebrow. "We do?" "Your piano playing," Max explained. "It's actually a secret code that only the good guys can understand. When you play at the senior center, you're really sending messages to our backup teams." Alex couldn't help it. He laughed out loud, a genuine, unfiltered sound that seemed to surprise even him. It had been so long since he'd felt this light, this free from the weight of everything. He caught Joy's eye across the table, and something warm passed between them. From behind the counter, Mrs. Dottie watched the scene unfold, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. She'd been quietly wiping the same spot for the past 10 minutes, clearly enjoying the show. As the lunch hour approached and other customers began filtering in, Joy disappeared briefly into the back room. When she returned, she was carrying something small and wrapped in brown paper. "Agent Max," she said solemnly, "in recognition of your exemplary service today, I present you with this." She handed him the package, which he unwrapped carefully to reveal a tiny leather-bound notebook, its cover embossed with silver stars. "Every field agent needs a proper journal," Joy explained, "for recording classified information and important mission details." Max ran his fingers over the cover reverently. "This is so cool," he whispered, momentarily dropping his spy persona in pure appreciation. Alex caught Joy's eye and mouthed, "Thank you," feeling a surge of gratitude that went beyond the simple gift. Joy just smiled and adjusted her plastic sunglasses. As they prepared to leave, Max was already scribbling in his new notebook. "Agent J," he called out as they reached the door. "Same time next week for the next phase of the mission?" "I'll be here, Agent Max," Joy replied with a salute. "The pancakes aren't going to protect themselves." In the car, Max couldn't stop flipping through the pages of his notebook, admiring the cream-colored paper and the tiny pocket in the back cover. "Dad, do you think I could write our mission report in here like a real spy?" "That's exactly what it's for, buddy," Alex replied, watching his son in the rearview mirror. That evening, after dinner and his nighttime routine, Max didn't ask for his usual bedtime story. Instead, he sat in bed with his new notebook propped against his knees, pencil moving across the page with purpose. When Alex peeked in later, he found Max still writing, the notebook now filled with the beginning of a story about a wheelchair-using secret agent and his two loyal partners, saving the world one breakfast at a time. 2 days after Operation Milkshake, Max sat in his therapy session with Tyler, his mind clearly elsewhere. He kept glancing at the clock, fidgeting with his wheels. "Something on your mind, buddy?" Tyler asked, pausing their stretching routine. Max bit his lip, then blurted out, "Can you take me to Dottie's? Like, after this?" His eyes were bright with purpose. "Dad's getting supplies for the house, and I need to do something important." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "Important, huh?" "Super important," Max insisted, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "It's about Dad's birthday next week. Please? I'll do extra exercises tomorrow." Tyler pretended to consider it, though his slight smile gave him away. "Well, since you offered extra exercises..." He checked his phone. "Your dad's supposed to be gone for at least another hour. We could probably make it work." Max pumped his fist in victory, then quickly composed himself. "But don't tell him. It's top secret." 20 minutes later, Tyler pushed open the door to Dottie's corner, the familiar bell chiming above them. The lunch rush had ended, leaving the diner peaceful and quiet. Joy sat at the counter, taking her break with a cup of coffee and a crossword puzzle. She looked up at the sound of the bell, her face brightening when she saw Max. "Hey, Agent Max. No Agent Dad today?" Max wheeled himself forward purposefully. "That's why I'm here. Can I talk to you? Privately?" He glanced at Tyler. "No offense." Tyler held up his hands in surrender. "None taken, I'll just grab a coffee." Joy set down her puzzle and followed Max to the far corner of the diner. He gestured for her to lean down closer, then whispered, "I need your help with something really important. It's Dad's birthday next week." Joy's expression softened. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to make him something special. Something that shows him..." Max paused, choosing his words carefully. "That shows him we're not going anywhere." Joy felt her heart squeeze at the weight behind those words. "Of course I'll help. When do you want to start? Can we go today? After your shift?" Max's eyes were hopeful. "Tyler can come with us. Dad won't be back for a while." Joy checked her watch. "I'm done in 20 minutes. We could hit the craft store on Main Street before it closes." Max's face lit up. "Perfect, I have some birthday money saved up." Joy shook her head. "This one's on me, kiddo." "But..." "No buts. Consider it my contribution to the mission." After Joy's shift ended, the three of them made their way to Creative Corner, the local craft store. The bell jingled as they entered, and Max's eyes widened at the rows of colorful supplies. Joy grabbed a basket and followed Max as he directed Tyler down the aisles. "What exactly are we making?" Joy asked. "A bracelet," Max replied decisively. "But not just any bracelet. It needs to be special." They gathered supplies: soft brown leather cord, silver clasps, and various beads. Max insisted on checking every aisle until they found what he was looking for: a space-themed craft kit that included braille beads. "These are perfect," he declared, running his fingers over the raised dots. "Can you help me spell something out?" Joy knelt beside his wheelchair. "What message did you have in mind?" Max leaned close and whispered, "Thanks for choosing to be my hero." Joy felt her throat tighten. She blinked rapidly, not trusting herself to speak for a moment. Instead, she squeezed Max's hand and nodded. They found a quiet corner of the store with a craft table. Joy laid out their supplies while Tyler kept watch for other customers. As Joy began working with the leather cord, Max explained why he'd chosen each component. "The leather needs to be brown because that's the color of Dad's favorite jacket," he instructed. "And the silver parts should go here and here because silver is like stars, and Dad always says looking at stars helps him think better." Joy worked carefully, following Max's detailed instructions. Her fingers moved steadily, stringing the braille beads in the exact order he specified. The message took shape slowly. "Thanks for choosing to be my hero." As she worked, Max grew quieter, watching the bracelet come together. Finally, he said in a small voice, "Dad always thinks people leave us. After Mom died, and after my accident, and after we had to move." He traced a pattern on his armrest. "I want him to know that someone stayed, that we're not alone anymore." Joy had to stop working for a moment, her vision blurring with tears. She understood now why Max had wanted the message in braille. It was like a secret between father and son, something private and special that went beyond words. Tyler, who had been giving them space, moved closer and put a gentle hand on Max's shoulder. "Your dad's going to love it, buddy." Once the bracelet was finished, Joy carefully wrapped it in tissue paper and placed it in a small box. The walk back to Max's house was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. The evening air was cool, and the setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks. At the front door, Joy handed the box to Tyler with careful instructions. "Keep this safe until his birthday, okay? And maybe help Max wrap it?" Tyler nodded solemnly. Mission accepted. Joy turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Max. "Your dad's lucky to have you, you know that?" Max shook his head slightly, his eyes serious. "He doesn't think so." Then he smiled, small but genuine. "But I'm lucky to have you." Joy felt her heart swell with emotion. Without hesitation, she bent down and wrapped Max in a tight hug. She couldn't find the words to express what she was feeling: gratitude, protectiveness, and a deep affection for this brave, thoughtful boy who had somehow worked his way into her heart. They stayed like that for a moment, holding on to something neither of them could quite name. When they finally pulled apart, both their eyes were a little damp, but their smiles were bright. Alex pulled into the driveway just as the sun was setting, his car loaded with supplies from his afternoon of errands. Through the front window, he could see Max and Tyler engaged in what looked like an intense game of cards. The sight made him pause. Max was grinning, something that had become increasingly rare over the past year. As Alex carried bags into the house, Tyler met him at the door. The therapist gave him a subtle nod, a quiet signal that everything had gone well in his absence. Max wheeled over quickly, almost running over Alex's foot in his enthusiasm. "Dad, Tyler taught me how to play poker with M&Ms, Max announced, holding up a handful of colorful candies. Alex raised an eyebrow at Tyler, who shrugged. Educational mathematics, probability and strategy. Right, Alex said dryly, but he couldn't help smiling at Max's obvious good mood. Whatever had happened while he was gone, it had lifted his son's spirits considerably. After Tyler left, Max chattered through dinner more animated than he'd been in weeks. He kept touching his pocket when he thought Alex wasn't looking, as if checking that something was still there. Alex noticed but didn't ask. Sometimes secrets were important, especially for a 9-year-old who had so little control over his life. The next morning, they followed their new routine and headed to Dottie's Corner for breakfast. The familiar bell chimed as they entered, but something felt different. Joy stood behind the counter, arranging coffee cups. She smiled when she saw them, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Morning, guys," she said, her voice warm but subdued. "The usual?" Max nodded eagerly, while Alex studied Joy's face. Dark circles showed faintly under her eyes, partially hidden by makeup. Her movements were slower than usual, more measured, as if she was carefully maintaining her composure. Throughout breakfast, Joy maintained her professional cheerfulness, but the easy banter was missing. No space jokes, no silly voices. She refilled their drinks promptly, answered questions politely, but seemed to avoid lingering at their table. Max shot worried glances at her when she wasn't looking, his earlier excitement dimming. Alex wanted to ask if everything was okay, but something held him back. They barely knew each other, really. What right did he have to pry? Still, he found himself watching her as she moved through the diner, noticing how her shoulders tensed when she thought no one was looking. As Joy disappeared into the kitchen, Mrs. Dottie emerged from her office. The older woman's sharp eyes took in the scene, noting Alex's concerned glances toward the kitchen. She made her way to their table, coffee pot in hand. "Refill?" she asked, but didn't wait for an answer before filling Alex's cup. Then, with a pointed look at Max, she added, "Sugar, why don't you go check out the dessert case? I just put out fresh brownies." Max looked between them, clearly sensing adult conversation brewing. He wheeled himself away, though Alex noticed he didn't go far. Mrs. Dottie settled into the booth across from Alex, her expression serious. "That girl's got a full plate," she said without preamble. "Don't play with her if you're not staying." Alex blinked, caught off guard by the directness. We're not." "Save it," Mrs. Dottie cut him off. "I've been watching you three. The way you look at her when she's with Max, the way she lights up when you walk in." She leaned forward. "Joy's been through enough. She doesn't need complications." Before Alex could respond, Joy emerged from the kitchen. Mrs. Dottie stood smoothly, patting Alex's shoulder as she passed. Just think about what I said." The rest of breakfast passed quietly. Alex paid the bill while Max wrote in his spy notebook, shooting occasional glances at Joy. As they left, Alex found himself looking back through the window, watching Joy clear tables with mechanical precision. That evening, after dropping Max off with Tyler for his therapy session, Alex found himself driving past the senior center. Soft piano music drifted through an open window. He parked his car and followed the sound, drawn by the melancholy notes. Through the window, he could see Joy sitting at an old, upright piano in an empty recreation room. Her eyes were closed as her fingers moved across the keys, playing something that sounded both sad and hopeful. The tension had left her shoulders, replaced by a gentle swaying as she played. Alex stood outside, listening. The music spoke of longing, of duties and dreams at war with each other. He recognized the feeling. It was the same one that had driven him to open his laptop the other night, to lose himself in the familiar comfort of coding. After several minutes, the music stopped. Joy sat quietly, hands resting on the keys. Alex approached the door and knocked softly. She turned, startled but not entirely surprised to see him. "How long have you been there?" "Long enough," he answered, stepping into the room. "Why don't you play at the diner? People would love it." Joy turned back to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. "It's not for people," she said softly. "It's for me. Some things are easier to say without words." Alex moved closer, understanding flooding through him. "Same reason I write code," he admitted. Joy looked up at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing something new. She shifted on the piano bench, making room. Alex sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. The room grew quiet except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Joy's fingers found the keys again, and she began to play something soft and simple. No flirtation, no pressure, no need to fill the silence with words. Just two people finding peace in the eye of their personal storms. The morning sun filtered through Alex's home office window, casting a warm glow on his dual monitors. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but his eyes kept drifting to the email draft on his second screen. The cursor blinked mockingly at the empty composition with only "to Joy" in the recipient field. He'd opened and closed this draft 7 times already. Each attempt at writing something felt either too formal or too personal. What would he even say? "Thanks for being nice to my son" seemed inadequate. "I can't stop thinking about you playing piano" felt too forward. From the kitchen, he could hear Max humming to himself, the occasional scratch of pen on paper punctuating the quiet morning. Alex minimized the email draft again and forced himself to focus on the code in front of him. He'd been working on this project for days now, a simple educational game that would help kids learn basic coding concepts, the kind of thing he used to create all the time, before everything. "Dad," Max called from the kitchen. "How do you spell reconnaissance?" Alex smiled despite himself. "Why do you need to know that?" "Top secret spy stuff," Max replied seriously. "Can't tell you." Alex pushed away from his desk and wheeled his chair to the kitchen doorway. Max sat at the table, hunched over his spy notebook, tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Colored pens and markers were scattered across the surface, and Max's breakfast plate sat forgotten to the side. "RECONNAISSANCE," Alex spelled out. "But maybe start with easier words for your first mission report?" Max shook his head firmly. "Can't dumb it down, Dad. This is important intel." The doorbell rang, announcing Tyler's arrival for Max's therapy session. Max quickly closed his notebook and shoved it into his backpack, shooting his father a meaningful look that clearly said, "Don't ask." Tyler came in carrying his usual equipment bag, plus what looked like a new board game tucked under his arm. "Ready for some work, Agent Max?" he asked, picking up on Max's spy mode immediately. "Roger that," Max replied, wheeling himself toward the living room where they usually had their sessions. While Max and Tyler worked through their exercises, Alex returned to his office, determined to actually get some coding done. But after 20 minutes of staring at the same function, he gave up and went to make coffee. Tyler found him in the kitchen during their break. Max was in the bathroom, giving the adults a rare moment alone. "So," Tyler said casually, accepting a mug of coffee. "Have you figured out what to do about the waitress?" Alex nearly dropped the coffee pot. "What?" "Joy," Tyler clarified, though they both knew he didn't need to. "Max talks about her constantly during our sessions. Says she's the only grown-up besides me who doesn't treat him like he's broken." Alex busied himself with wiping down the counter. "There's nothing to figure out. She's just nice to Max." "Right," Tyler drawled. "That's why you've been staring at your phone every session for the past week." Before Alex could defend himself, Max wheeled back in. But later, after Tyler had left and they were getting ready to head to the diner for dinner, Alex found himself admitting quietly to his reflection in the bathroom mirror. She makes it hard to stay detached. The familiar bell chimed as they entered Dottie's corner that evening. The dinner crowd was thin, just a couple of regulars at the counter and an elderly couple in the corner booth. Joy stood at the register, counting out change. She looked up at the sound of the bell and Alex immediately noticed something was wrong. Her usual warm smile seemed forced and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her ponytail was messier than usual, wisps of hair falling around her face as if she'd been running her hands through it repeatedly. "Hey guys," she said, her voice lacking its usual energy. "Your usual booth is open." As they got settled, Alex watched Joy move between tables. Her movements were mechanical, lacking the fluid grace she usually possessed. She brought their drinks without the usual banter, forgot Max's extra straw, and barely met their eyes. Max tugged on Alex's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "something's wrong with Joy." Before Alex could respond, they heard a crash from the kitchen. Joy had dropped a coffee pot, dark liquid spreading across the floor. Mrs. Dottie appeared immediately, touching Joy's shoulder and saying something too quiet to hear. Joy nodded, wiped her hands on her apron, and disappeared through the back door. Mrs. Dottie handled their table after that, but Max kept watching the kitchen door, waiting for Joy to return. She didn't. When they finished their meal, Max's face was pinched with worry. As Alex paid the bill, Mrs. Dottie held him back with a gentle hand on his arm. Max was already by the door, adjusting his jacket. "Her dad had another episode last night," Mrs. Dottie said quietly, her eyes full of concern. She didn't sleep. Alex glanced toward the kitchen window, where he could see Joy standing at the industrial sink. Her hands trembled as she tried to fill a coffee pot with water, and she had to stop, gripping the edge of the sink instead. The fluorescent kitchen lights highlighted the exhaustion on her face, the weight she carried in her shoulders. In that moment, Alex understood. Behind Joy's easy smiles and gentle kindness lay battles they knew nothing about. While she had been helping them heal, making Max laugh, creating a safe space for them both, she had been fighting her own war in silence. Through the window, he watched as Joy took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and picked up the coffee pot again. Her hands still shook, but her jaw was set with determination. She was going to finish her shift, keep moving forward, because that's what she always did. Max wheeled back to the counter. "Mrs. Dottie," he asked softly, "can you give this to Joy?" He pulled a folded paper from his spy notebook, a carefully drawn picture of a superhero in an apron, serving milkshakes while flying through space. Mrs. Dottie took the drawing with a gentle smile. "I'll make sure she gets it, sugar." As they left the diner, Alex couldn't help looking back one more time. Through the kitchen window, Joy continued her work, a silent warrior in an apron, fighting battles far beyond what she showed the world. 2 days later, Alex found himself driving through the darkened streets toward Dottie's corner. He'd tucked Max into bed early, claiming a headache when his son asked where he was going. The guilt of the small lie sat heavy in his stomach, but something pulled him toward the diner tonight. The familiar neon sign cast a warm glow across the empty parking lot. Through the windows, he could see Joy moving between tables, her shadow dancing across the worn linoleum floor. The closed sign hung on the door, but the lights were still on. Alex sat in his car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. What was he doing here? He could turn around, drive home, pretend he'd never come, but the image of Joy's trembling hands at the sink 2 nights ago wouldn't leave his mind. Before he could talk himself out of it, Alex got out of the car. The evening air bit through his jacket. He hadn't realized how cold it had gotten. The bell above the door chimed as he pushed it open, the sound somehow louder in the empty diner. Joy looked up from where she was sweeping, her eyes widening in surprise. She wore a different apron tonight, plain blue instead of her usual decorated one, and her hair was coming loose from its ponytail. "Alex," she said, broom pausing mid-sweep. "Is everything okay? Is Max Dash?" "Max is fine," Alex assured her quickly. "He's home, sleeping." He shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how strange this must seem. "I just thought you might want some coffee." Joy's expression softened, but she shook her head. "That's really nice, but I should get home. Dad gets confused if I'm not there when he wakes up." "Just one night off," Alex said quietly. The words surprised even him with their gentleness. 20 minutes. That's all. Joy looked at him for a long moment, her fingers fidgeting with the broom handle. Finally, she propped the broom against the counter. "Tea," she said. "If we're breaking routine, might as well go all the way." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 paper cups of steaming tea. "Come on," she said, nodding toward the door. "I've been staring at these walls all day." They settled on the wooden bench outside the diner, under the flickering glow of an old street lamp. The night was quiet, except for the occasional passing car and the distant sound of a train whistle. The tea warmed Alex's hands through the paper cup. "Dad had a good day today," Joy said suddenly, staring into her cup. "He remembered my name all morning, even helped me make breakfast." She smiled, but it was tinged with something sadder. "Those moments, they make it harder sometimes. Because I remember how he used to be, how he'd sing while he cooked, tell terrible dad jokes." She took a sip of tea before continuing. "Sometimes now he looks at me like I'm a stranger, asks where his little girl is even though I'm standing right there. The doctors say it'll get worse." Her voice caught slightly. "I keep thinking I should be used to it by now, but..." "You never get used to losing someone piece by piece," Alex said softly. The words came out before he could stop them, carrying the weight of his own loss. Joy turned to look at him, her eyes gentle in the dim light. "No," she agreed. "You don't." The street lamp buzzed above them, its light flickering like a faulty heartbeat. Alex stared at his tea, watching the steam curl into the cold air. "My wife," he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. He'd barely spoken about her since it happened. "She died 2 years ago. It still feels like yesterday, and also like someone else's life." Joy didn't say anything, didn't offer platitudes or sympathy. She just sat there, present and listening, her shoulder barely touching his on the narrow bench. The silence felt like permission to continue. She was the one who knew how to handle everything. Max's care, the doctors, all of it. "I just wrote code, built things. Thought I could fix anything with enough time and logic." He let out a quiet laugh that held no humor. "Can't code your way out of grief, turns out." "No," Joy said softly. "But you're doing it anyway, handling everything, being there for Max." "Barely," Alex admitted. "Most days I feel like I'm just pretending to know what I'm doing." "Maybe that's all any of us are doing," Joy replied. "Pretending until it becomes real." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping tea that grew cooler by the minute. A car passed by, its headlights sweeping across them briefly before plunging them back into the soft darkness. "Thank you," Joy said eventually. "For the tea. For this." She gestured vaguely at the space between them. Alex nodded, understanding what she meant. Sometimes words just got in the way. Joy stood up, gathering her purse from where it sat at her feet. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful in the unsteady light. "You're allowed to want good things, you know," she said quietly. Alex watched as she walked away, her figure growing smaller in the misty night. The street lamp continued its uneven flickering, casting shadows that danced across the empty bench beside him. "So are you," he whispered into the darkness long after she was gone. The words hung in the cold air, carrying a truth neither of them was quite ready to face. Alex sat there a moment longer, holding his empty paper cup, before finally standing to leave. The bell above the diner door remained silent, the parking lot empty except for his car, as if the whole evening had been a dream. The following afternoon, sunlight streamed through the windows of Alex and Max's house, casting warm patches across the hardwood floors. Max had spent the morning practically vibrating with excitement, checking his watch every few minutes as they waited for Joy to arrive. "Are you sure she's coming?" Max asked for the 10th time, wheeling back and forth near the front window. Alex glanced up from his laptop where he sat at the kitchen counter. "She texted 20 minutes ago. She's on her way." The doorbell chimed and Max's face lit up. He spun his wheelchair around so fast Alex worried he might tip over. "She's here." Alex walked to the door, trying to ignore the way his heart picked up speed. When he opened it, Joy stood on their porch, her arms full of supplies. She wore jeans and a soft green sweater instead of her usual diner uniform, her hair loose around her shoulders. She carried a stack of comic books under one arm and clutched a paper bag that clinked with what looked like glass bottles. "Special delivery," she announced with a grin. "One batch of top-secret milkshake supplies and some required reading material for any respectable spy." Max wheeled forward eagerly. "Did you bring the alien flavor? Would I dare show up without it?" Joy stepped inside, her eyes taking in the house. It was modern but lived in, with Max's artwork decorating the walls and medical equipment tucked discreetly into corners. "Nice place you've got here, agents." Alex closed the door behind her, watching as Max immediately launched into showing Joy around. "And this is Mission Control," Max explained, leading her into the living room where his spy journal lay open on the coffee table. Joy set her supplies down and listened intently as Max pointed out various surveillance points throughout the house. Her eyes caught on the upright piano against the far wall, but she quickly looked away. "Can we show her now?" Max asked Alex, practically bouncing in his chair. Alex nodded and Max wheeled quickly toward his room, returning moments later with a carefully wrapped package. The space-themed ribbon sparkled as it caught the light. "Ta-da!" Max held up the gift proudly. "We need your help with the note, though. I want it to be perfect." Joy sat cross-legged on the floor next to Max's wheelchair, examining the wrapped bracelet. "It already looks pretty perfect to me, but I'm happy to help." Alex moved to the kitchen, giving them space while pretending to work on his laptop. He couldn't help glancing over as Joy and Max huddled together, whispering and writing. Joy's face was animated as she listened to Max's ideas, offering suggestions in between fits of laughter. "Hey, Dad," Max called out eventually. "We're gonna make cupcakes. Joy says every secret mission needs snacks." Before Alex could protest, Joy was already pulling ingredients from their cabinets like she belonged there. She tied her hair back and rolled up her sleeves, directing Max in measuring flour and sugar, while somehow managing to keep most of it in the bowl. The kitchen filled with the smell of vanilla and chocolate as they worked. Joy showed Max how to test if the cupcakes were done by gently pressing the top with his finger. "See? They should spring back, just like that." While the cupcakes cooled, Max convinced Joy to look at the piano. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing down. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Will you play something?" Max asked. "Please? Just one song?" Joy hesitated, glancing at Alex. He nodded encouragingly, and she sat down on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before she began to play. The melody was simple but beautiful, filling the house with warm, gentle notes that seemed to make everything softer somehow. Alex watched her as she played, the afternoon light catching in her hair, her expression peaceful and focused. He noticed the way she swayed slightly with the music, how her fingers moved with such certainty across the keys. The house felt different with her in it, warmer, more alive. Max wheeled closer to the piano, transfixed. When Joy finished playing, he applauded enthusiastically. "That was awesome. You have to teach me sometime." "Deal," Joy said, standing up from the bench. "But first, I think those cupcakes are calling our names." They gathered in the kitchen, frosting cupcakes with more enthusiasm than skill. Joy showed Max how to make swirls with the frosting bag, and soon they were all laughing at their misshapen attempts. Even Alex joined in, though his cupcakes looked more like abstract art than dessert. The afternoon passed quickly, filled with comic book discussions, spy mission planning, and enough sugar to fuel several secret operations. Alex found himself relaxing, drawn into their easy banter and shared laughter. He caught himself watching Joy more than once, the way she listened so intently to Max's stories, how she seemed to fill empty spaces without trying. Eventually, Joy glanced at her phone and sighed. "I should head out soon. Dad's caregiver leaves at 6. They walked her to the door, Max still chattering about their next mission. Joy shouldered her bag, now considerably lighter without the milkshake supplies. "Thanks for coming," Alex said softly, standing in the doorway. Before Joy could respond, Max wheeled up behind Alex and announced matter-of-factly, "Dad likes you. He's just scared." Alex felt his face flush hot. "Max?" But Joy just raised an eyebrow, looking amused. Her eyes met Alex's, and something unspoken passed between them. She took a small step closer, close enough that Alex could smell vanilla and sugar from their baking adventure. "That makes 2 of us," she said quietly, her smile soft and genuine. Then she was gone, walking down their driveway in the golden afternoon light, leaving Alex standing in the doorway, stunned but smiling. The house seemed to hold its breath, still warm with the echo of music and laughter. The next morning dawned bright and crisp. At a corner table in Dottie's corner, a food blogger passing through town snapped photos of her breakfast, capturing the vintage charm of the diner. In the background of one shot, Alex sat with Max at their usual window booth, both of them laughing over something Joy had just said. The blogger posted the image with a casual caption, "Love the mysterious regulars at this hidden gem. Small town charm, diner life." The photo spread quickly across social media. Something about the man's profile, the way he carried himself, caught people's attention. Comments started appearing. "Is it just me, or does he look familiar? Wait, doesn't he look like..." Within hours, the image had been shared thousands of times. 36 hours later, a tech journalist who'd covered Silicon Valley for years made the connection. The article appeared first on a major news site, then spread like wildfire. "Where is tech mogul Aretsukusu Hatu now?" The shocking truth behind his disappearance. The piece laid everything bare. It detailed how Alex Hart, once celebrated as a pioneering force in artificial intelligence, had vanished from public life 2 years ago following a devastating scandal. His company's AI system had been found to have critical security flaws that compromised millions of users' data. The article revealed his current alias, his location, and most painfully, the tragic circumstances of Max's injury. A car accident that had taken his wife's life and left Max paralyzed. By mid-morning, news vans began appearing on the quiet streets of the small town. Reporters clutched coffee cups outside the diner, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive tech mogul. Inside Dottie's corner, Joy sat in a back booth during her break, her phone screen glowing as she read the article. Her hands trembled slightly as details of Alex's former life unfolded before her. The man she'd come to know, the quiet, devoted father who coded late at night and smiled at his son's spy games, was also someone else entirely. A tech celebrity, a millionaire, someone who'd been living under an assumed name. She read about the scandal, about the accident, about everything he'd never told her. Each word felt like a small betrayal. The simple connection they'd built over milkshakes and piano music suddenly seemed constructed, manufactured. Had any of it been real? Mrs. Dottie watched from behind the counter as Joy's face grew paler. When Joy suddenly stood up, nearly knocking over her coffee cup, Dottie didn't try to stop her. Joy pushed through the back door into the alley behind the diner, needing air that wasn't thick with questions. She leaned against the brick wall, her mind racing. Every interaction with Alex replayed in her head, now tinted with doubt. All those careful conversations, the things he'd shared and hadn't shared. Had it all been calculated? She thought about Max, about the bracelet they'd made together, about the trust she'd placed in both of them. The sound of the familiar bell above the diner's front door echoed through the morning air. Joy knew without looking that it would be them, their usual time, their usual routine. but nothing felt usual anymore. Inside, Alex and Max entered, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. Max wheeled toward their regular booth, but stopped short when he saw Joy's replacement server approaching instead. Alex scanned the diner, noting Joy's absence with concern. Mrs. Dottie appeared at Alex's elbow, her usually sharp eyes softened with something like sympathy. "You might want to talk to her," she said quietly, nodding toward the back door. "Alone." Alex's stomach dropped as he noticed a discarded newspaper on the counter, his own face staring back at him from the front page. Understanding dawned, cold and heavy. He asked Max to wait with Mrs. Dottie and headed for the back door. He found Joy behind the building, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She stood in the shadow of the old brick wall, but he could see the wetness in her eyes, the fierce set of her jaw. She didn't turn to look at him. "Joy," he started, but she cut him off. "You let me trust you," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "Let me believe in something simple." Finally, she turned to face him, and the hurt in her eyes made him step back. And it was all a lie. "It wasn't like that," Alex tried to explain, taking a step forward. "I needed to protect Max. After everything that happened." "That's not kindness, Alex," Joy interrupted, her words sharp and clear. "That's control. You decided what truth I deserved to know. You let me share my life with you while hiding yours." She pushed away from the wall, wiping roughly at her eyes. "I told you about my dad, about my music. I let you and Max into my life because I thought—" She broke off, shaking her head. "I thought I knew who you were." Alex reached out, but Joy stepped back. "Joy, please, everything between us, it was real. I just couldn't—" "Couldn't what?" she challenged. "Couldn't trust me? Couldn't be honest? You had so many chances to tell me the truth, Alex. Instead, I had to read about it online like everyone else." She walked past him, her shoulders straight despite the tremor in her voice. Alex stood frozen, watching her go, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. Through the diner's window, he could see Max watching from the car, his young face confused and silent. The morning sun cast long shadows across the alley, and somewhere in the distance, Alex could hear the clicks of camera shutters as reporters gathered, waiting to catch a glimpse of the man he'd tried so hard not to be. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft clink of Max's spoon against his cereal bowl. The overhead light cast a warm glow over the table, but Alex's face remained in shadow as he sat lost in thought. Outside, a few persistent reporters still lingered near their house, their cameras catching only darkness through the drawn curtains. Max watched his father carefully while pretending to focus on his late dinner. He'd seen that look before, the one where his dad retreated so far into his head that he might as well be in another room. Usually, Max let these silences stretch, knowing his father would eventually surface on his own. But tonight felt different. The empty space where Joy should have been felt too big to ignore. Taking a deep breath, Max set his spoon down with deliberate care. Why was Joy upset? The question pulled Alex back to the present. He looked at his son, seeing the worry etched in the boy's young face. Max had already lost so much: his mother, his ability to walk, and now Joy. Alex owed him at least part of the truth. "She found out something about me that I should have told her sooner," Alex said quietly, choosing his words with care. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, a gesture Max recognized as his father's way of buying time when emotions got complicated. Max's frown deepened as he processed this. His fingers drummed against the edge of the table, a habit he'd picked up from Joy during their spy game planning sessions. The memory seemed to strengthen his resolve. "So, fix it," Max said simply, as if the solution was the most obvious thing in the world. Alex's chest tightened at his son's straightforward logic. If only adult relationships were that simple. If only trust, once broken, could be repaired with a single action or apology. The next morning, after dropping Max off with Tyler for his therapy session, Alex drove to the diner. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his knuckles white with tension. He'd spent half the night composing and deleting messages to Joy, trying to find the right words to explain everything. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, but the sound felt wrong somehow. hollow without Joy's cheerful greeting to follow it. A different server moved between the tables, wearing the same style apron but none of Joy's warmth. Mrs. Dottie stood behind the counter, her usual sharp gaze softened with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Before Alex could ask, she shook her head. "She quit this morning," Dottie said quietly, wiping the same spot on the counter over and over. Left no explanation, just called before opening and said she couldn't come back. Alex felt the words like a physical blow. He pulled out his phone, fingers hovering over Joy's contact information. Did she say anything else? Where she was going? Not a word, Dottie replied. She finally set the cloth down and looked at him directly. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. Throughout the day, Alex tried everything he could think of to reach Joy. He sent carefully worded emails explaining his past, his reasons for hiding, his regret at not trusting her sooner. He typed and retyped text messages, trying to strike the right balance between apology and explanation. Once, in a moment of desperation, he even called her number, but it went straight to voicemail. The silence that followed each attempt felt deafening. Max noticed the change immediately. His therapy sessions with Tyler grew quieter, the usual banter replaced with one-word answers and long pauses. The spy journal Joy had given him sat untouched on his bedside table. His jokes, once flowing freely, became rare and forced. Alex watched helplessly as his son withdrew further into himself with each passing day. The bracelet Max had made with Joy remained hidden away, his birthday approaching like a reminder of everything they'd lost. One evening, after another silent therapy session, Alex prepared dinner, Max's favorite pasta with extra cheese. He set the plate in front of his son with forced cheerfulness, trying not to notice how the diner's absence from their daily routine had left a void that seemed to grow larger each day. Max stared at the food without moving. His hands remained in his lap, his expression distant. "You need to eat something, buddy," Alex said softly, sitting down beside him. "Tyler says you barely touched your lunch, too." Max continued to ignore the food. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Alex reached out to touch his son's shoulder, but Max shifted away slightly, a small movement that felt like an earthquake. "Max, please," Alex whispered, his voice cracking. "Talk to me." Finally, Max lifted his head. His eyes, so much like his mother's, held a wisdom far beyond his 9 years. "You always say people leave," he muttered, each word careful and deliberate. "But Joy didn't leave. You pushed her." The truth in those words hit Alex harder than anything the press had ever printed about him. Harder than the scandal headlines. Harder than the public criticism. Harder than all the accusations of negligence and greed. Because this wasn't about his past mistakes or his professional failures. This was about the present he'd sabotaged, about the trust he'd broken not just with Joy, but with his own son. He opened his mouth to respond, but found no words. What could he say? Max was right. He'd been so focused on protecting them from his past that he'd destroyed something precious in their present. He'd taken the simple joy of their diner days, the warmth of Joy's presence in their lives, and complicated it with his secrets and fear. Alex sat there beside his son, both of them silent now, the untouched pasta growing cold between them. Through the kitchen window, he could see the last rays of sunlight painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors that used to fill Dottie's corner during their evening visits, when Joy would hum while refilling their drinks, and Max would tell his elaborate spy stories. The weight of Max's words settled over them like a heavy blanket, and for the first time since the accident that took his wife, Alex felt truly lost. Not because someone had left them, but because he had finally recognized his own role in pushing them away. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes of light across Max's untouched breakfast. 2 weeks had crawled by since Joy's departure, each day feeling longer than the last. The house had grown quieter, as if all the warmth and laughter Joy brought had seeped out through the cracks she'd left behind. Tyler arrived for Max's therapy session, his usual easy smile in place despite the heavy atmosphere. He carried his familiar bag of equipment, stretchy bands, small weights, and the special deck of cards they used for their modified exercises. But today, something was different. Max didn't even pretend to be interested. "Hey, buddy," Tyler said, setting up the equipment with practiced efficiency. "Ready to work on those space captain muscles?" Max remained in his wheelchair, shoulders slumped, staring at the floor. The spy journal Joy had given him lay forgotten on a nearby shelf, gathering dust. "I don't feel like doing anything," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Tyler exchanged a concerned look with Alex, who hovered uncertainly in the doorway. They'd seen Max have bad days before, but this felt different. The spark that had returned to his eyes during their diner visits was gone, replaced by a dullness that scared them both. "That's okay," Tyler said gently, sitting down at Max's eye level. "Want to tell me what's on your mind instead?" Max shook his head, his fingers absently tracing patterns on his armrest, the same way he used to draw alien maps on the diner's paper placemats while Joy watched and added her own details. Across town, Joy moved through her doubled shifts at the senior center like a ghost of herself. The familiar halls seemed longer, the hours stretching endlessly as she tried to keep her mind focused on the present moment, rather than dwelling on the warmth of Dottie's corner or the sound of Max's laughter. She was helping Mr. Jenkins with his lunch when the call came. Her father had wandered away from home again. The neighbor who usually checked on him had found him confused and injured in the street, his knees and palms scraped from a fall. Joy's hand shook as she signed him into the emergency room. The fluorescent lights made everything feel harsh and unreal as she watched the doctors clean and bandage his wounds. Her father kept asking for her mother, dead these past 5 years, and each time Joy had to remind him felt like a fresh wound. The hospital bill arrived later that afternoon, the numbers swimming before her tired eyes. She'd been stretching her budget thin already, picking up every extra shift she could. But this was impossible. The weight of it settled in her chest, making it hard to breathe. During her break, Joy approached her supervisor's office, her steps heavy. The conversation was brief and devastating. No advances available, no overtime left to claim. Just sympathetic looks and a handful of pamphlets about assisted care facilities and government programs. "There's a grant program," her supervisor explained, sliding a form across the desk. "For caregivers in your situation. The deadline's next week." Joy stared at the paper, her throat tight. The form asked for details about income, expenses, care requirements. It asked her to quantify her father's decline, to put numbers to the way he sometimes forgot her name, to explain why she couldn't manage on her own anymore. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper, but couldn't bring herself to pick it up. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that all her sacrifices, leaving music school, working multiple jobs, giving up her dreams, still weren't enough. The form blurred as tears threatened to fall, but she blinked them back. She couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Not ever. That evening, after her second shift ended, Joy found herself drawn to the senior center's small music room. The old upright piano stood in the corner, its wood worn smooth by years of use. She'd played here countless times before, quiet melodies to soothe residents who couldn't sleep, cheerful tunes during activity hours, gentle background music during meals. Tonight the room was empty. The last activities group had cleared out hours ago, leaving behind the faint scent of coffee and sugar cookies. Joy sat at the piano, her fingers finding the keys without thought. She began to play, not the simple pieces she usually chose for the residents, but something deeper, more complex. The music flowed from her hands like water, carrying with it all the words she couldn't say. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but her hands remained steady as they moved across the keys. The melody spoke of loss and longing, of sacrifices made and chances not taken. It spoke of Max's bright smile and Alex's quiet strength, of shared jokes and stolen moments that felt like belonging. It spoke of her father's good days, when his eyes would clear and he'd remember her name, and of the bad days when he looked at her like a stranger. She didn't notice Mrs. Peterson standing in the doorway, phone held carefully in arthritic hands. The elderly woman filmed quietly, her eyes soft with understanding. She'd known Joy for years, had watched her give and give until there was nothing left, had seen the way she hid her exhaustion behind warm smiles and gentle words. Mrs. Peterson's fingers moved slowly but deliberately across her phone screen, typing out the caption, "Music from the girl who's never stopped giving." The post uploaded just as Joy's song came to an end, the final notes hanging in the air like a prayer. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the building's heating system. Joy sat motionless at the piano, her hands finally still on the keys. The tears she'd been holding back all day rolled silently down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. In the empty room for just a moment, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything she'd lost and everything she couldn't seem to hold on to. Mrs. Peterson slipped away as quietly as she'd come, leaving Joy alone with her music and her memories. The night deepened outside the windows, but Joy remained at the piano, her red-rimmed eyes fixed on the keys where her hands still rested, steady despite everything. The morning sun filtered through Max's bedroom window, casting warm patterns on his walls. He'd been awake for hours, his mind churning with an idea that had taken root the night before. The video of Joy playing piano at the senior center had appeared on his tablet's feed, her music speaking volumes about the pain she carried. Max's eyes drifted to his desk drawer where the birthday gift for his dad still lay wrapped and waiting. The space-themed paper remained crisp, untouched since that afternoon with Joy. He'd refused to give it to his father after everything fell apart. Now, looking at it, he realized it had always belonged to someone else. When Tyler arrived for the morning session, Max was already dressed and waiting in the living room. Alex had left early for a conference call, leaving them alone with the usual list of exercises and activities. "Tyler," Max said, his voice firm with determination, "I need your help with something important." He clutched the wrapped gift in his lap, his knuckles white against the paper. Tyler studied Max's face, noting the serious set of his jaw. "What kind of something?" "I need to go somewhere, and I can't tell Dad." Max's eyes were steady, challenging Tyler to refuse. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, considering. He'd known Max long enough to recognize when something really mattered. "This about Joy?" Max nodded, pulling up the video on his tablet. The melody filled the room, haunting and beautiful. "She's at the senior center. I found the address." Tyler watched the video, his expression softening. "Your dad wouldn't like us going without telling him." "Please," Max said quietly. "I have to fix this." Something in Max's voice, the raw honesty of it, made Tyler's resistance crumble. He sighed, already reaching for his car keys. "All right, buddy, but we're not staying long." The drive to the senior center was quiet, Max clutching the gift like a lifeline. Tyler helped him out of the car and into his wheelchair, noting how the boy's shoulders squared with determination as they approached the entrance. The lobby was bright and cheerful, with paintings lining the walls and soft music playing from hidden speakers. A few elderly residents dozed in comfortable chairs, while others played cards at small tables. The receptionist looked up as they approached, her smile friendly but professional. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Joy," Max said, his voice carrying across the quiet space. "Please." The receptionist hesitated, glancing between Max and Tyler. "I'm not sure if—" "It's okay, Sarah." Joy's voice came from the hallway. She stood frozen in the doorway, still wearing her work uniform, her face a mixture of exhaustion and surprise. "I know them." Max wheeled forward slowly, the wrapped package balanced carefully in his lap. Joy hadn't moved, her hands gripping the doorframe like she needed the support. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights, but her gaze was fixed entirely on Max. "Hi," Max said softly, stopping a few feet away from her. Joy swallowed hard. "Hi, Space Captain." Max reached down and lifted the gift, holding it out to her. The space-themed paper caught the light, the silver stars seeming to twinkle. Joy stepped forward hesitantly, her hands trembling slightly as she took it. "I don't understand," she whispered, looking at the carefully wrapped package. "Open it," Max said. Joy slowly peeled back the paper, revealing the small box underneath. Inside, the leather bracelet lay coiled, its braille beads spelling out the message Max had chosen so carefully. "Thanks for choosing to be my hero." "I was never thanking Dad," Max said quietly, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I was thanking you. For staying. For seeing me. For making normal feel fun. Joy sank to her knees in front of his wheelchair, the bracelet clutched tightly in her hands. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks now, but she made no move to wipe them away. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around Max, pulling him into a tight hug. I missed you so much, kid, she whispered into his shoulder, her voice breaking. Max hugged her back just as fiercely, his own eyes glistening. We all did. Tyler had stepped back, giving them space for their reunion. He watched from near the reception desk as Joy finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked toward the entrance, then back at Max with a question in her eyes. Is he here? She asked softly. Max shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Not yet. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Joy's desk at the senior center. She'd just finished helping Mr. Thompson with his physical therapy exercises when Sarah, the receptionist, called her over. This came for you earlier, Sarah said, holding out a plain white envelope. No return address. Joy turned the envelope over in her hands, her heart skipping when she saw her name written in neat, precise handwriting. The paper was thick, expensive, not the kind you'd find at a regular store. Inside, she found a simple thumb drive and a note that made her breath catch. Max said I should stop hiding. A. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the drive. She knew that handwriting now, had seen it on napkin doodles and coffee cup sleeves. Alex's careful letters, always trying to maintain control even in the smallest things. The senior center's computer lab was empty this time of day. Joy sat at the farthest station, away from the windows where afternoon activities were winding down. The thumb drive clicked softly as she plugged it in, and a single video file appeared on the screen. As it began to play, Joy's hand flew to her mouth. The animation was beautiful, hand-drawn figures flowing across the screen in watercolor hues. A boy in a wheelchair appeared, his face bright with wonder as he gazed at the stars. Then a waitress, her apron covered in pins, teaching him to see magic in ordinary moments. The music was gentle, piano notes that reminded her of quiet evenings and shared secrets. Each scene told their story, the spy games, the milkshakes, the late-night conversations. But it wasn't just about the moments they'd shared. It was about how those moments had changed them all. The final scene showed a star map, intricate and detailed with a simple label, Home. Joy leaned closer, recognizing constellations she and Max had discussed during their impromptu astronomy lessons. At the bottom of the screen in Max's distinctive scrawl was a message, Come to the backyard at 7. Joy checked her watch, 6:30 p.m. Her shift had ended 10 minutes ago. She sat there for a moment, her heart racing, before standing up so quickly her chair rolled backward. Sarah, she called out, rushing to the front desk. I need to leave early. Sarah took one look at Joy's face and smiled knowingly. Already cleared it with management. Go. The walk to Alex's house felt both too long and too short. Joy's mind raced with memories, Max's laughter, Alex's quiet observations, the way they'd become part of her daily rhythm without her even noticing. The sun was setting as she approached their street, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. When she reached their house, Joy paused at the gate to the backyard. String lights twinkled overhead, creating a warm glow that turned the simple space into something magical. Max sat near a portable projector screen, beaming as he arranged what looked like homemade cupcakes on a folding table. You came, Max called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Before Joy could respond, the back door opened. Alex stepped out holding a hardcover book, his expression a mixture of nervousness and hope. The book's cover caught the light. What Love Sounds Like, written in elegant script over an illustration of a piano keyboard and stars. Hi, Alex said softly, walking toward her. Joy stayed rooted to her spot, watching as he moved closer. He looked different somehow, more open, less guarded. The walls he'd built so carefully were finally showing cracks. Happy birthday, Max, Joy said, her voice barely above a whisper. Max grinned. Dad wrote us a story. Will you listen? Alex cleared his throat, opening the book with careful hands. As he began to read, his voice carried the weight of every unspoken word between them. The story was simple but beautiful, about a man who'd forgotten how to see magic in the world, and the woman who reminded him it was everywhere if you just knew where to look. Joy felt tears forming as Alex's voice grew thick with emotion near the end. He didn't know what love looked like, Alex read, his eyes meeting hers. But when she laughed, it made him believe in it. The silence that followed felt charged with possibility. Joy stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. You still suck at hiding your feelings. A smile tugged at Alex's lips, genuine, unguarded. I'm done hiding, he said quietly. Then, taking a deep breath, he asked, Can I take you to dinner? Somewhere that's not pretending to be normal? Joy felt warmth spread through her chest as she looked between Alex and Max, seeing the hope in both their faces. Her smile grew wider as she replied, Only if Max picks the mission. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patches of light across the wooden table where Joy and Max huddled over sheets of paper. Their hot cocoa mugs steamed beside them, half forgotten as they focused on their artistic creations. This one's called Neptune 2, Max explained, his tongue poking out slightly as he concentrated on drawing perfect rings around his invented planet. It's got 3 moons made of crystal, and the atmosphere is totally breathable for humans. Joy leaned over, adding swirls of color to her own celestial creation. Well, my planet has floating cities and anti-gravity zones where you can do loop-de-loops in your wheelchair. Max's eyes lit up. Can we combine them? Like make them sister planets? Absolutely, Joy said, reaching for her colored pencils. Should we add a space highway between them? The sound of footsteps made them both look up. Alex stood in the doorway, still in his morning workout clothes, taking in the scene before him. Something in his chest tightened at the sight. Joy's messy morning hair, Max's excited grin, the scattered art supplies and half-empty cocoa mugs. It looked so natural, so right, like a snapshot of what their mornings should have always been. Dad, Max called out, we're planning Mission Starbreak, come see. Alex moved closer, placing a gentle hand on Joy's shoulder as he leaned in to examine their artwork. Mission Starbreak? It's our first official mission, Max explained, his hands moving animatedly. We're going to that old observatory in Mountain Peak, the one we read about online. They have special viewing nights and everything. Joy looked up at Alex, her eyes twinkling. Your son has quite the imagination. He's already mapped out 3 possible routes and created a backstory for why we need to observe these specific constellations. Alex pulled up a chair, settling in beside them. Oh, really? And what's our cover story? Max straightened up importantly. We're undercover astronomers tracking a mysterious signal from space, but we have to be super careful because other secret agents might try to steal our discovery. Of course, Alex said seriously, though his eyes danced with amusement. We'll need disguises then. Already handled, Joy said, pulling out her phone. I've got the perfect playlist for our cover. Mix of space-themed classics and spy movie soundtracks. Can't be proper secret agents without the right background music. While Max and Joy debated the merits of different songs, Alex quietly pulled out his laptop. He'd already researched Mountain Peak Observatory, but now he began making actual arrangements. He found a small lodge nearby that specialized in accessible accommodations, complete with wide doorways and roll-in showers. He booked a private viewing session at the observatory, making sure to note Max's wheelchair requirements. The morning stretched into afternoon as they planned their adventure. Max drew detailed maps of their route, complete with coded symbols for safe houses, really just rest stops, and potential enemy surveillance points, traffic cameras, obviously. Joy created elaborate code names for everyone and designed a simple cipher they could use to pass secret messages. I need to make a quick stop, Joy said eventually, gathering her things. Got to talk to Dottie about taking some time off. Alex caught her eye, understanding passing between them. This wasn't just about a few days away. This was Joy choosing to reshape her life around their little family. At the diner, the familiar bell chimed as Joy pushed through the door. Dottie looked up from behind the counter, her knowing smile already in place. "Well, well," Dottie said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Look who finally figured it out." Joy approached the counter, her steps sure but her heart full of gratitude for this place that had brought her so much more than just a job. "I need to give my notice, Dottie. Not because I'm running away this time, but because you're running toward something better," Dottie finished, coming around the counter. "Took you long enough to go where you're needed." The older woman pulled Joy into a tight hug, and Joy felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "Oh, honey," Dottie said, pulling back to look Joy in the eye. "You thank me by being happy. Now go on. I see that car waiting outside." Sure enough, Alex's car was idling by the curb, Max waving excitedly from the back seat. Joy gave Dottie one last quick hug before heading out. The evening air was crisp and full of possibility as they pulled away from town. Max sat in his specially modified seat, his precious spy journal open on his lap as he made notes about their mission parameters. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks like nature's own send-off celebration. Joy pulled an old Polaroid camera from her bag, a thrift store find she'd been saving for something special. She aimed it at Alex just as Max told a particularly terrible space pun, capturing the moment his laugh lines crinkled and his head tilted back in genuine amusement. The camera whirred, spitting out the developing photo. Taking another shot through the windshield, Joy captured the open road stretching before them, their headlights just beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. She tucked both photos carefully into the sun visor, letting them develop while she turned up the volume on their carefully curated playlist. The wind whipped through the car as Joy rolled down her window, letting the fresh air tangle her hair. Freedom and joy bubbled up inside her, spilling out in a spontaneous shout. "First one to Mars wins." "Not fair," Max protested from the back seat, but his voice was full of laughter. "I'm in a wheelchair." Joy twisted around in her seat, grinning at him. "You've got turbo wheels. I'm doomed." 3 months passed, like pages turning in one of Max's stories, each day writing itself into their shared history. The autumn air carried a crisp sweetness as life settled into new patterns at the Hart residence, now home to not just Alex and Max, but Joy too, who had transformed the guest house into her own cozy sanctuary. The community center's music room had become Joy's second home, where she spent mornings teaching piano to eager students. Her father was doing better in his new assisted living facility, and she visited him daily, often bringing Max along to share stories that made her father smile even on his cloudiest days. Max's wheelchair tracks now marked familiar paths between the main house and Joy's place, evidence of his constant visits to share his latest creative works. His bedroom walls displayed a growing collection of hand-drawn comics and story manuscripts, each one more detailed than the last. The local coding club for kids had become his favorite weekly activity, where he helped younger children learn the basics of programming with a patience that made Alex's chest swell with pride. On this particular Sunday afternoon, their backyard hummed with life and laughter. The late September sun cast long shadows across the grass as smoke from the grill drifted lazily skyward. Tyler stood at the BBQ expertly flipping burgers while chatting with 2 of Max's friends from therapy group. Mrs. Dottie had arrived early, as usual, carrying her famous potato salad and immediately taking charge of the outdoor dining setup. Through the open windows of the main house, Joy's piano music floated out into the yard. Not classical pieces this time, but gentle improvisations that seemed to capture the peaceful mood of the gathering. She played softly, creating a perfect backdrop for the casual conversations and children's laughter that filled the air. Max sat in the center of the yard, surrounded by a small audience of kids and adults alike. His spy journal lay open in his lap, but he barely needed to look at it anymore. He knew his latest story by heart. His voice carried clearly across the lawn as he read, his hands moving expressively to emphasize key moments in the tale. The boy looked down at his broken wheels, Max read, his voice steady and confident, but he didn't see what was missing anymore. He saw what he could build instead. The wheels weren't just wheels, they were the beginning of something amazing, something that could fly. Alex leaned against the deck railing, watching the scene unfold before him. His eyes kept drifting to Joy at the piano, taking in the way the sunlight caught her hair, how her fingers danced across the keys without hesitation. She had brought music back into their lives in more ways than one, filling empty spaces they hadn't even realized were there. His hand slipped into his pocket, fingers brushing against the small velvet box he'd been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. The key inside had been specially made, its engraving carefully chosen. Looking at Joy now, seeing how naturally she fit into their world, he knew. This was the moment. Alex crossed the yard quietly, nodding to Tyler, who gave him a knowing smile. As he approached the piano, Joy's music shifted slightly, incorporating a melody she often played when he was near, their own unofficial theme song. She didn't stop playing as he placed the velvet box on the piano, but her eyes widened slightly at the sight of it. The music slowed, her left hand maintaining a gentle rhythm while her right hand reached for the box. She opened it carefully, and her breath caught as she saw the key nestled inside. Lifting it out, she read the engraving. "Home is wherever we park the spaceship." Joy's fingers stilled on the keys, the last notes hanging in the air. She looked up at Alex, her eyes bright with understanding and emotion. No words were needed. They'd learned to read each other's silences months ago. The afternoon mellowed into evening, and their guests gradually departed. Mrs. Dottie was the last to leave, hugging Joy tightly and whispering something that made them both laugh. Max, tired but happy, let Alex help him get ready for bed without his usual protests about being independent. After Max fell asleep, Alex and Joy found themselves on the porch swing, gently rocking in the cool night air. The key hung on a simple chain around Joy's neck, catching occasional glints of moonlight. The evening was quiet except for the soft creaking of the swing's chains and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Joy's laughter broke the silence, not loud, just a soft chuckle at some shared memory. Alex smiled, feeling the familiar warmth that her presence always brought. They didn't need to fill every moment with words anymore. They'd learned to be comfortable in the spaces between conversations. The swing creaked gently as Joy shifted, leaning her head against Alex's shoulder. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. "You hear that?" Alex listened, trying to catch whatever had caught her attention. The wind in the trees, a distant cricket, the quiet sounds of their peaceful neighborhood at night. "What?" Joy's smile was audible in her voice as she replied, "That's what love sounds like." If you enjoyed the story of Alex and Joy, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.